through some examples. So I'll go through, the notes, explain what the documents are, then we'll go through some examples. Hopefully the examples I got were really good. And like those of you who missed the earlier conversation, Radhika and I have been going back and forth this week and last week on an HOA who is, leaves a lot to be desired. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and screen share. Here we go. Okay, can everybody see this? HOA documents?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Before we get into this, I want to explain that there are HOAs that are not incorporated. That does happen, especially like if there's only, like 4 or 5 houses, they have this informal HOA. So what we need, when that happens, what we need is we need a written letter or a statement from the authorized representative of the association specifying that the association is not incorporated. And if you run into that, what you do is that you'll create a folder, a new folder, and it's off to the side, and you can mark it, HOA explanations or HOA emails or something like that. And that way, when we go to look at the transaction is for compliance, we already know that we're not going to have everything. So if it's really informal, a lot of times you have basically nothing. But we have to have that in writing in order to protect you and the brokerage. Because if we have a DRE audit, or if something happens after close, we can go back to the documents and support our case that, we have nothing to do with it. Because the reality is that if they're going to blame somebody, they're going to blame us because they think we have deep pockets. And we don't. Okay, articles of incorporation, obviously it's as the saying, basically this is their formal statement. We are forming an HOA. This is our name, and this is our corporation, and they give the addresses and tells who's the management. And every year they're supposed to be updating this information. So if they change managers for the association, they can update that. It's an information statement that they need to do. The bylaws are for how they're going to be running the HOA. So it establishes how, meetings, when the meetings are going to be, the annual meetings, special meetings. So it encompasses all of that in terms of how they're going to be running it. And I put a note in here. I found this very interesting when I was doing my research. I never knew this before. That you need to check the last page of the bylaws to see if it's signed. Because if it's not, it can impact, as it's saying here, can impact a HUD, FHA, and Fannie Mae certification of HOA loans. So that could cause a problem, and I give you a recommendation on how to get that fixed. Okay, the next one, covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Okay, now on this, we're going back to Real Estate 101, Real Estate Practices and Principles. You guys should remember this. What is a covenant and what is a condition? And these contain, like it's saying here, the legal description of the development. It also sets forth the name of the association and restriction. It has the major restrictions and describes the property rights for the owners and the obligations that comes with buying a property into this HOA. And it also defines, who the members in the association, who's responsible, for instance, the outside of the building. Well, it's usually the HOA for the maintenance duties. And also it talks about their enforcement powers. So if somebody is violating rules or regulation of the ground rules, so it spells out, what the process is and who's responsible for doing what. Also making sure that they're insured. Somebody, from the board is also, defines that you have certain type of insurance, what you're supposed to have. If there's disputes, or, how's that going to be resolved, and how the attorney's fees are going to be paid. So it's kind of, it's the iCloud view, looking down to the 6,400 foot high vision of how everything's going to be run and operated. So remember, I put it in here, this is going back to basics: a covenant and a condition. A covenant is a promise, and that's like, you can obey, you're going to obey the grounds rules and things like that. Conditions is actually when they can rescind your rights. If you go back to principle, I think it's in the principles and practices, they talk about covenants and conditions. And they can actually, if it's serious enough of a violation, they can actually rescind your right to live there. So that's what the CC&Rs are for. And of course, the restrictions, the limitations of the owners. And like I said, this is the big sky view of things. And so a lot of times in the restrictions of covenants, they'll say that, okay, you're limited to two dogs or two cats or whatever, but it doesn't go into the granular. And, they may say you can only have two vehicles, or, you can only have, you can only plant certain types of things on you can't plant things on the common area, but you can plant things on your balcony or whatever, on your courtyard. And as we're talking about here, there's two different kinds of restrictions, and those that are found in the CC&Rs, and those that are adopted later, which are the rules and regulations. Okay, because the rules and regulations get more granular. This is the house and ground rules. And as I was talking about the dogs, they said in the CC&Rs, it says, well, you can have two dogs. Well, then in the ground rules, it gets more granular, and they can say that dog has to be in a leash. It cannot be, have excessive barking. It has to be under 65 pounds. And in some cases, there are HOAs who have banned certain breeds of dogs, especially pit bulls. Pit bulls are banned. That's the most common one, is a pit bull. And it talks about, the association, it covers, like parking. You have to park in your driveway. You can't park out in the driveway overnight. Like, for instance, it was the Del Webb communities on their streets. You can't park a car overnight on the street in a lot of the Del Webb communities. They want you to use the driveway or the garage. It talks about, can you put a sign on your front lawn if you're selling? A lot of places do not allow that. You can put one in your window, but you can't put one out on the on your front lawn. A lot of them have restrictions on window coverings, that anything that faces the outside, it has to be white or off-white, things like that. So it's more granular. And sometimes, then we have the operating rules and regulations. And these are generally regulations adopted by the board that applies to the management. So they will, get into, like I was just reading, how they're working on defining where I have my HOA. They're working on redefining the responsibilities of the resident manager and things like that. Also, insurance summary. Okay, and a good tip where to find this, a lot of times you will find this in the annual budget, if they don't give you a separate document. So look in the annual budget. Also, what you will find in the annual budget a lot of times is the name, contact information of the HOA management company that is managing the HOA for you, not the board, but the HOA company, because we need that also. And annual budget. You guys, you can read through this yourself. I'm not going to read every line to you, but this outlines what you should expect to see in an annual budget. And annual budgets are really key, as you'll see when we start diving into examples of things that we see and what to look for. See, oh, here it is right here, insurance summary. That's in the annual budget. The reserve studies are really important. The purpose of this is, as it's stating, it's for the repair. It is for when you're doing major projects. For instance, every 5 years, the outside of the building needs to be repainted. So that is budgeted for in the reserves. So that when you get to that time period, the HOA has the funds to do that. Or they know that, like, if you have flat roofs and their foam roof, those have to be replaced I think it's every 10 or 15 years, they have to be replaced. These are major things. The reserve study will also talk about just regular maintenance in the reserves. How much is it going to cost to keep the landscaping done? Things like that. And as it's saying here, unless the total replacement costs are less than 50 cents of the gross budget, excluding association reserves for that period. So all associations, regardless of the size, are required to prepare a reserve study. So this is what helps you prevent special assessments if you plan well. And a lot of times they will have a category for what do they call it? For things that you're not planned for that can happen. Okay, FHA loans. If you don't have a reserve study, you're not going to be able to get an FHA loan. They require it, and I believe I think the VA also requires that. Meeting minutes, and this is really important because this is a lot of times where you're going to find all the dirt. And they're obligated, and Radhika can tell you for sure how many times we have to go back. If we're on the buy side, we have to go back to the listing agent and say, we're missing meeting minutes.
95% of the transactions that we do, we end up going back to the listing team, and then they will say, you can contact the HOA directly. So they don't own it. Then, yeah, Laura knows the remaining story.
Yeah, and this is, and they're supposed to be made available to you. And as an example, I just sent this morning, I sent a request to the manager of our HOA, asking for the meeting minutes for the last 12 months and the associated budget documents, because they were talking about raising our HOA fees, and there were a few other things that I was not happy about when I heard about it. So I'm going to have to do my homework. But this is where you're going to be finding this information. And you'll see below when we go through the examples of why this is so important. And I'll add in that, like Radhika was saying, 95% of the time we're missing them. These are legally required. So keep that in mind. And Radhika will tell you that she's seen my emails many times. Is one of my first questions when people are missing HOA documents. It's, did you send them a notice to perform? This is just like anything else. You know, any documents that they're supposed to be giving you, like the NHD or anything like that. These are required by law. Required.
Laura,
Yeah.
Laura, one question.
Yes, ma'am.
Mm, see, as per the purchase contract also, it says condominiums and common interest developments, that HOA required docs section talks about condominium. Now we have some single family homes that have formed their own HOA and then some nominal fee. They don't operate like a regular HOA, like the incorporated one. So in those cases also, do we have to, follow this due diligence and then issue a notice to perform? Because lender seems to be accepting those, whatever available documents
Yeah, I
for
understand.
single families.
Right.
Yeah. So that was a question because
Yeah, well, for instance, as an example, where my condominium is, we have I have two HOAs. One is for our residential buildings, and the other HOA is for the clubhouse and pool, because our development was created in 4 separate phases, and each phase has its own HOA, but we all share the clubhouse and the pool. But they do have some documents, and you get as much as you can. It's more than I think it would be lean more towards that they are not incorporated. But they should have like a budget, because they have to do repairs. So you got to push them as hard as you can to see if you get whatever you can get out of these people.
Right.
And they usually have meeting minutes, because they do have a board. They normally do have a board, so you want to get the meeting minutes from them if they have them. And let me end while we're on this. There's been like Rada bought for her client a home right on Torrey, just behind Stevens Creek. There's about a dozen houses in there, maybe 15. And they have a HOA, but they really don't. And it's been there for like 25 years, and they've been operating just fine, but they just don't really, they operate by cooperation. It's just, so there were no HOA docs. We had none, even though that they were an HOA. So we just have to make sure that we properly document it, because if something happens or the DRE does an audit, we have to show that we did our due diligence. Okay, this required statement of fees. We want to find out, is anything owed? Right? How much are the current fees? Are they going to be doing an increase? And is there any past due funds that need to be paid for, things like that? So we need a statement. And how much are they charging us, or us, or the seller? How much are they charging the seller to create the documents? What is required by law versus contractually? If you look at the HOA-RS, these are the ones that are required by law. All of these documents. And contractually, all of these are required if it is applicable. Not all HOAs have assigned parking spaces, or designated storage spaces. And the best way to figure that out, if you're on the buy side, is to look at the MLS listings, and instead of having a garage, they have a carport. And that's when you'll see, how, the number of designated parking spaces and the location of the parking space.
So In such cases, can we just upload the screenshot of MLS where it says garage?
No,
Uh,
no, because we need to know what is the parking space, what number is it?
No, what I'm saying is if there is no designated parking other than the attached garage, there is no carport, there is no other permitted parking as we see on MLS. In that case, the listing teams won't give us parking and storage disclosure car form. So in such
Yeah,
cases, do you
just
still expect us to
upload it.
upload? Okay.
Yeah, and circle it. That way we know. Yeah, it's like, for instance, an example of spaces. The 101 Alma in Palo Alto is a high-rise condo building. And they have not only designated parking spaces, they also have storage lockers. So in a case like that, we would need to see both, because we have to know, we have to have it in writing, where they are. But you're right, there are some that it's kind of like a free-for-all. And those ones are a lot of times they're converted apartments. And usually apartments don't have designated parking spaces. It's free. Whoever gets there first gets the parking space. Right. And right here, name of contact information for other HOAs of governing the property. Again, a lot of times you're going to find this in the budget. This is usually where it is. And pet restrictions. And I tell you, pet restrictions, you want to pay a lot of good attention to, because as I said, there can be weight limits, and there can be breeds that are not allowed. And if you have a buyer that has a Saint Bernard, which is a very large dog, weighs 120 pounds, you move in and you get a notice, that your buyer gets a notice saying that the dog has to go because they are restricted to 65 pounds. Believe me, they're not going to be happy with you. And if they can come back and say that if they had known this, they would not have bought the condo. Now, granted, it may have been in the CC&Rs or in the rules and regulations, but when people get upset, the first person they're going to blame is us. And I don't know if I can say this clearly enough and harshly enough. It is your fiduciary duty to read these documents, because according to the code of ethics, this is your expertise, and you are to do this, your due diligence, and perform your fiduciary duties on behalf of your client, because you're considered the expert, not your client. And you can get nailed to the cross for that. I cannot say this strongly enough. It is your job to read through this. You don't have to read it line for line, but there are certain things, once you get used into a rhythm of looking at HOA docs, you know exactly where to look for the problems. And this is just an example of what the covenants, conditions, and restrictions looks like. And I go through this when I'm looking for certain things, like, I think I highlighted general association maintenance and repair. Oh, who's responsible for what, to fix what? So I want to look that up. Architectural restrictions. Remember I talked about the windows. Or you have a gardener. They a lot of times will say you can't put like an arbor in that can be seen outside of your unit. You can't do that. Household pets, parking vehicles and restrictions. A lot of times, was just reading some yesterday. They had restrictions on the type of plants that are allowed because some plants are invasive, and they discourage fruit trees. You know, these are things that to a lot of people are really important. This is why you have to read them. Okay, here's their signature page, their certification. This would be their certification for FHA. And this is a sample of the rules and regulations. Barbecues are not allowed on balconies. You know, window frames, they have to be white or dark bronze. You're talking about garage door. They're responsible for certain maintenance on their garage doors. Backyards. Do not install trees near your backyard that bears, oh, this is the one, bear fruit or are messy. They can get very detailed. You know, interior pest control, roaches and ants and things like that. That's if it's inside, the owner's responsible. You know, Christmas trees can't be placed in the dumpster. Yep, here's the ever-going, here's the pets. Let's see, did this one have a weight? But yeah, they talk, you know, oh, these are the CCNRs, I'm sorry, restricted vehicles, forbidden vehicles. Okay, we're talking about the parking, you know, right here, assigned carport. This is how you know you're gonna have to fill out the form and find out where it is. And here's an example. Here's their space number, and here's the storage space number. Here's your statement of accounts, the demand. Okay, now Radhika brought it to my attention that we're seeing another form that's being used, and it's kind of similar to this, but it's telling you things like, you know, the penalty for delinquency. What is the monthly assessment? You know, the insurance company name, how to contact it. It lets you know, it's right here, special assessments must be paid in full at the close of escrow, if there is any. But this is what you should be looking for. Now, as the listing agent, you should be making sure that this is in the packet, so you don't get accused of holding back information, or this can cause delays in closing if you don't have all the documents. So as a listing agent, you need to talk to your seller and advise them, you know, these are required by law. And if we don't have everything that we can possibly get, the liability falls on the seller and the agent. Because the law is very clear that the seller is responsible for ensuring that all the documents are gotten. Granted, it's the HOA who sends them out, but the seller, if there's things missing, the ultimate responsibility falls on the seller and possibly the agent. And if you're on the buy side, you should be looking, you need to know what to look for. Okay, this is one that Dry Creek is doing, the community management. And they have their own format. As long as we have the information, we're fine. We just need the right information. Radhika, I think this is the one you sent me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we're seeing this format more and more. You know, this is the insurance disclosure. It tells you all of because there's not just one insurance policy, there's multiple. Like the directors and officers liability insurance for coverage for the board, things like that. Excess liability, you know, general liability, property insurance, you know, workman's comp, because you have people that are working for the HOA, so they have to be covered. This is the big one. This is the reserve study. could not get this switched. I don't know how to do that.
Laura, sorry to interrupt. One
Yeah.
quick question on the previous
Yes.
slide, the insurance disclosure.
Yeah.
So sometimes we see that by the time, suppose we are representing buyers, and we got into contract, but the insurance disclosure
Fired.
is outdated. Yeah,
Yep.
expired last month. And then when we reach out to the listing team or the escrow who is coordinating the HOA docs, they say that suppose the listing agreement was signed and HOA docs were ordered in June. And then as on that day, the insurance expiry was for July 20th, right? So they consider it as still active insurance and they include it in the package. But then now when we are in contract and we ask for the updated summary, they say that there is an additional fee for getting the updated insurance summary, and then the payment needs to be done. So now in this case, who is responsible for it? Listing team sometimes doesn't own it. They say, if you want, you need to order it. But whose responsibility is it to get the right insurance summary in this example?
The seller.
Right? Okay.
The listing side is responsible.
Got it.
Yeah.
We have right now one transaction, so that will be helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's what they don't understand is what happens if, because they assume everything's being taken care of, and you cannot assume anything, right? I mean, we all know that one, and like on this one, but this was from August, and you can see in October on this one, things were expiring. And people forget, sometimes maybe something slipped through the cracks. So now it's November and somebody forgot to renew all of the insurance policies. And there's a major fire in the buildings. Oh, may not be covered. It depends. And that's why it's and the thing is that you need to protect yourself. So document, and Radhika, is really good at this, is that, we start an email thread, and so we can show that we've done our due diligence. We tried to get the documents. They were not cooperating. So something happened, it's on them. That's something that people, they don't take it seriously enough. And it only takes one time to ruin your career and be wrapped up in a lawsuit up to your eyeballs. As an example, what can happen? Sarah Sanusi sold a house that, and I think it was a historic house. She sold a house. The transaction closed, and shortly afterwards, the house caught fire. And it was deemed that it was bad wiring inside the wall. And because of the significance of the house, and there was investors that had bought it, they sued everybody. Sarah, the owner, everyone that was involved in it, they sued everybody. And remember, you have a deductible on your E&O insurance. And it cost Sarah several $1,000s out of her own pocket just to get dropped from the lawsuit. And this is why it's so important to make sure that you have everything lined up, you have everything documented. But these things happen. This is an example of stuff happens. And you want to make sure, that you're covered. That you have everything documented, that, that you're okay. Because they will come after you, whether you should be involved in the lawsuit or not. And then you have to pay to get yourself dropped in the lawsuit. mediation is not fun. Lawsuits are not fun. I can tell you, because we've been involved. We had an agent do something that they should not have done. And it took 6 or 7 months to get everything squared away. And we had to settle. And it cost out of pocket the entire deductible for the agent, which was at that time $15,000. So I don't know how many of you have $15,000 sitting around in your checking account. And this is why we have to be very diligent and make sure we do our fiduciary duties, and we document everything we do. Okay, we're gonna be looking at several reserve studies. Now this is what you would love to see on a reserve. 96% funded, 100% funded. I mean, this is a dream. This is a very well-run HOA. And that makes my heart go, woo, because this is well funded. Versus calculator. Oh, this is another one. This is another one that's 100% funded. This is where you do the happy dance. And then we have another one, because these reports are not done by the HOA. These are done by CPAs. Okay, and I'm not a CPA, but I can, and I'm not a mathematician, but I can look at this and say, ooh, there's a problem. Because your reserve is at 7.1% funded. This means the HOA's special assessment and deferred maintenance risk is currently high. Oh, here's another recommendation. A one-time assessment in the amount of $1,410,000 to help fund upcoming reserve projects. This is why you read the reserves. And this is why you read meeting minutes. Oops, here we go. Sorry, this is still the report. So we're seeing in here, they're in deep doo-doo. Now we're getting into the meeting minutes. What am I looking for? Okay, number one, I underlined this. HOA has aluminum wiring. Not a good thing. There was a short period of time when they were using aluminum wiring, and it was discovered that aluminum wiring is prone to overheat and cause fire. And therefore, people are replacing it. Okay. Here's another thing that makes me like, what's going on? If installed, no other plumbing can be used when washer is in use. We'll need to install fire sprinklers. What's going on? They don't have fire extinguishers? We'll increase the electrical panel and units panel. Electrical engineer will need to be hired. Well, who's paying for that? That's not cheap. Last 2 years, the HOA has suffered $223,000 in overflows, backups, and clogged drains. Adding washer and dryers will add to the plumbing by 30%. Who's paying for all this? And remember, they've already been told they'll probably need an assessment. Oh, reserve study shows only that here in reserves, do we need a special assessment? These are all in the minutes.
Hey, Laura.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm going to have a quick echo here, but what's the percentage that's acceptable for
70% should be that, and that's the recommendation of Davis Sterling, and that's where most of this came from, is the Davis Sterling Act. They were the ones who enacted the
Wow.
litigation, so they like 70%. And I'll tell you, and this happened to me. Our HOA has been very good at making sure we have extra funds in the reserves for the emergency. And we were cited and told, not cited, we were told by the city, I think it was the city or the insurance company, one of the two, that 6 trees on our property had to be removed because in high winds, the trees tend to snap and they were too close to the building. Each tree to be removed, the removal for each tree was $50,000. And we had 6 trees that had to come out. So because we had good reserves and we were able to move around some of the stuff on the landscaping, we were able to cover that without doing a special assessment. But can you imagine if you're down to 28% in your reserves, and all of a sudden you've got a $300,000 bill, where's that money going to come from? It's going to come out of your pocket. So look at this, ode to the reserves. I mean, I was like, you gotta be kidding me. And my concern is, did the agent show this to people? Percent funded, 6.4. That's frightening. Reserve deficit per unit, over $27,000. Here's another reserve study. Look at this. This is for that same complex. This is out of their reserves. This is why you look at this, reserve funded, 51%. That can be a problem. Estimated deficiency, reserves, 14,000 per unit. This is what you need to be looking for in your documents, because I sent out an email to our office last week or the week before, reading the HOA docs. We had a case where I was going through the file for compliance, and I started noticing all these comments in the HOA minutes. Where they were talking about putting a fence around the property and putting in security lights and putting an electronic gate in and yada, 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 just all of this stuff was going on. And so I went back to the agent and said, look, we're missing the last 6 months of the HOA meeting minutes. What's going on? You got to find out. Well, we get the meetings, the minutes for the meetings, and they were talking about a $50,000 assessment per unit. Fortunately, the buyer had the money and went through with the transaction. But can you imagine if your client scraped the money together and got in there, and they were struggling and they were in a tight budget, and all of a sudden someone says, oh, by the way, we have a $50,000 assessment. That is scary. Here's another one, 21%. Here's some more HOA. Okay, this is a big one for some complexes. If they have decks, remember this one, the SB 326. This is all the decks have to be inspected by January 1st. And this is the result of, if you remember, there was 2 incidences. One was in Berkeley, where some foreign students, a bunch of them were out in the balcony, and the balcony collapsed and they fell several stories, and like 6 or 7 were killed. And it was because of the the deck itself, the way it was wood, and where you couldn't see it unless you were actually inspected it, it was rotted and it could not support the weight. So now this is a unit, these people have, remember, 21% funded. And they're just talking about repairs. They don't even have a quote yet.
Laura?
Yeah.
Hi, this is Brian. I just have a quick question. Deck repairs, is that a legal requirement now for all HOAs and
Yes.
condo communities to have decks inspected? And what is the time requirement? Like, when do they have to be inspected by? And if repairs
I
are
believe
needed,
it's
when
January 1st.
of next year?
Yeah.
Okay. And if repairs are needed, is there a time frame that they need to be completed by?
That I don't know. I know that there's a whole bunch of condos over here off of Stevens Creek. It's between Stevens Creek and 280 and Saratoga Avenue.
Mhm.
What is it? Norwalk. It's off of Norwalk. And several of the balconies have been red tagged. They can't use them.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. They red tag them until they can be fixed.
Okay, so if we want to look out for that for our clients, is the reserve study the best place to look out for that?
Yeah, you want to make sure that the because it's the ones with wood deck. I think it's the wood decks.
Is it wood decks or all decks?
I believe it's just wood decks. I'll send me a text or something, and I'll send you the link to Davis Sterling.
Okay.
And there's a video on that.
Okay.
Yeah, because this is replacing, especially if it's high up, replacing a deck is really expensive. But here's other things that we're looking. Go ahead.
Laura, I have the same question with Brian. That the situation currently happened to me, that a condo in Mountain View. So it sit on the market for 3 months. A buyer get in contract, but then just back out 2 days ago. And the listing agent reached out to me and say the reason is because of the deck repair. And I asked him to send an email regarding the problem, and he said the balcony repair project involved completely rebuild 8 balcony. So the project, it should begin and thinking to complete in mid of December. So now my buyer also interested in that one, but she really concerned, like she don't know, is that a huge problem and how did that affect her later. But then when I read in the HOA doc, it say no special assessment, no dispute.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also uncertain.
Yeah, I would give a call, see if you can get a hold of the HOA themselves and find out what's going on. If somebody will talk to you, or find out who's the president of the board.
And what information I should find out?
You should be ask them about it. I heard that some of the decks need to be replaced. Was this planned for? Do you guys have the reserves for this?
But then the leasing agent said there's no special assessment for this.
For the moment, yeah, because
Right.
they may not have a quote.
Oh, but I need to find out how much to fix a deck, correct? And
Well, you want to look to see how their reserves look. If they have healthy reserves, you're probably okay. But this is something that you need you may want to put in writing, asking if they have received quotes for the repairs. And if they have been, and if that has been approved, is that included in the budget?
then how do you know? Of course, they're gonna use that in the fund, the reserve. But after they pay that one, of course, the reserve gonna go down lower. And as you say, they may have add the special assessment later to the whole.
Oh, no, the way the reserves work is every time you make a payment to the HOA, a portion of that goes into reserve. So they're constantly replenishing the reserves. And if
see.
they planned for it, it should be on the budget. If you look in the budget, because they break everything down, because again, the annual review is done by CPAs. And they break everything down by line item. It's very detailed.
I see. Another question is, the lender gonna approve the loan if he know this going on and happen? Or does it
I don't know if the lenders are aware of it or not.
They will aware of it, right? So the first buyer, they reject the loan because of this problem. So now my buyer interested. So the question is, her lender approve it or not, right?
It all depends on the lender.
Okay, okay,
Yeah, you would have to ask the lender.
okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Laura, I just have a quick follow-up on that. So I mean, I understand the reserve studies are for all planned expenses. So something like this deck was a recent thing in the last few years. So I'm assuming most likely that it's not going to be in more recent reserve studies.
It depends on the HOA.
Okay.
Because this bill was passed a couple of years ago, and they've had plenty of time to figure it out. But some
So my
HOA,
next question,
some
is there a
HOA
frequency requirement
put
for
blinders
reserve
on.
studies?
Pardon?
Another question is there a frequency requirement for reserve studies? Do they have to be
Every
done
year.
every 2 years? Every year?
Yeah.
That's a legal requirement, or because I know there are some communities out here that don't have it every year.
Yeah, so I don't have to scroll back. Okay, it's an annual budget. Remember, at the very beginning,
Well, there's an annual budget and then there's a reserve study. Those are different
the
things, right?
reserve summary of the reserves, the revert, that's here. We'll go back up. Okay, where am I? This is what this is the annual budget report. Right here, reserve summary. The plan, funding plan. Major component repairs. So if they have got decks that they have to repair, that's going to be itemized.
Okay.
So this should all be there. And it's like it says, it's an annual. And this is under civil, right here, it's under Civil Code 5300.
Gotcha. Is budget report the same thing as reserve study?
It's the same thing, yeah. Reserve summaries.
Okay.
Sorry to
Okay,
interrupt for a little bit. So is there another thing called like a 30-year and reserve study, something like that? That's a different thing, right?
Well, that's part of it. They go out and they go out, several years. Because, like the roof has an age on it. The siding has a life. Carpet, in carpets in common areas, they have a life. They may have to be replaced every 10 years. So they know, for instance, that, certain plumbing things have to be updated every so many years because they have a lifespan. And that's why they have reserves, because they're planning for what's going to be done in the future. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that does. Right. Yeah, that makes sense. But like, how often do they conduct that study?
They're supposed to do it every year.
For 30 year?
Well, look at this one right here. This is a reserve study. And it starts at 2023 and goes out to 2052. So it went out 30 years.
Okay, so the HOA out to conduct the 30-year reserve plan
It's not
study
really
every
the
year.
HOA. They hire a CPA firm to do this.
Right. So this is done every year as well.
It should be, yeah.
Okay. Thank
Because
you.
things change. Right?
Makes sense.
Okay, I want to point out some other things that I saw in here. Ah, whoops, where did it go? Oh, here it is. Yeah. And this is HOA minutes. Oh, yeah. Termite work. Here we go. Oh, well, that's not bad, 860. Good. Here's something else. There's a gate for 6,000. Okay, here's a proposal for rodent flashing. You know, and what I do is I just kind of look up at the maintenance schedule and see if here's something else. Repiping. Was they planned for this? Is this in the maintenance plan? And I couldn't find it when I was looking at their stuff. $76,000. So this is when you look at this and you want to go, ooh, let's look back up. You know, somebody's having a loss of hot water. I read one where it was I couldn't remember which property it was. Somebody reported that there was water intrusion in another unit, meaning that this was not the first unit that had water intrusion problems. And here they're talking about putting, you know, through the HOA minutes, they're talking about putting a fence around a dumpster and a gate on it. That is not cheap. You know, repiping. Oh, well, the other units, now we're talking $200,000. And this is an HOA that has a 21% reserve. So, and this, you know, so this is things there to me that says they have a problem. They have a water problem, a piping problem. You know, they're replacing the fence in the parking lot. You know, when you see things like that, this is when you, let me stop sharing. Stop sharing. Okay. When you have things like that, this is when you want to look back up and see, were they planning on this? Or is this just happening? This is an unplanned event. Because it's an unplanned event, where's the money going to come from? And the HOA, and also in the board meetings, a lot of times when you find out if you have a problem neighbor because they've been cited for something continuously. Like in my HOA, we had and it was a continuous problem. The grounds manager had to report it all the time that he was working on his cars in the parking lot and he's not allowed to. So it was a continuous thing. We found out that one of the other neighbors was Airbnb-ing her unit, which is not allowed in our association. And actually, it was next door to my unit, which I was not happy about. So this is why you go through the HOA minutes and you go through, look at the reserves, look at the money, see if, you know, things are going, because this last one, I'll tell you, they're in serious trouble. This last example I gave you. And a lot of those condos that are off of Norwalk, some of those HOAs are going to be having probably special assessments because a lot of their decks have been red tagged. And then somebody was telling me, I don't know how true it is, but somebody was telling me that they were having structural problems in the underground parking. So this is why it's important to read this stuff, because you have a duty to your client to provide, to read through this and advise them and at least point it out. Like I said, that one where all of a sudden we found out that they were talking a $50,000 assessment. The buyer didn't care, but he made a decision with full knowledge. He knew that this is a possibility and was okay with it. And also, I want to remind you guys that HOAs, when all the documents, when you're given a HOA packet, it's all supposed to be itemized so you know exactly what's in the packet. So, and I want to repeat, if their HOA is not incorporated, we need to have that in writing from somebody in authority. So that way we, you know, the hard part for us is we're between a rock and a hard space. We have laws that they expect us to, well, get all this information and yada, yada, yada. But there is no arm of the government that's in charge of enforcing this on the HOAs. It's kind of like they're looking at us to police it, and God help us if something goes wrong and something doesn't get disclosed, because then they're probably going to blame us. That's just the way it always does. But what you need to do is look through the HOA docs, maybe highlight something, talk to your client about it, document that you talked about it. And like I said, some things are no big whoop. Somebody, may look at, maybe the guy's a plumbing contractor and he knows all about this stuff and goes, yeah, it's not a big deal. It happens all the time. You don't know, but at least when your buyer is making a decision, they know they're making an informed decision. If you're on the listing side, you want to make darn sure that you've done your diligence, and say you're having trouble getting documents, put it in writing to the HOA or put it in notes. So they can't come back and say that you did not do your fiduciary duty to get all the documents. So you don't get blamed. And it protects your seller. And this is what your seller has to understand, is that you're pushing for this because, Mr. Seller, I'm protecting you because we want to make sure that we get all the information. So when we give it to the buyer, they make an informed decision. And they can't come back later and say, we didn't tell them. And that's how you sell it. And if you have people that are not cooperating, this is why we have a notice to perform. It kind of puts them on notice that you're taking this seriously. It doesn't mean your buyer's definitely going to cancel, but at least your buyer has a choice at this time. They need to understand that, what's missing, and, so they can make an informed decision. And again, make sure everything is documented. Emails are great. Text messages, save them. There's apps out there that you can print off conversations. So are there any more questions or any thoughts on this? Am I getting crickets?
Hi, Laura.
Laura, I have a question.
Sorry.
Sorry. Yvette, I think asked earlier, what is acceptable amount for percent funded for the reserve?
Yeah.
I think most of the Duck HOA finances I've seen are closer to 25 to 50%. So in your eyes, should we not recommend our clients move forward with those?
You don't make any recommendation. You just point that out.
Okay. For our knowledge, is that just bad then? If it's at 25% funded or
That would make,
50% funded?
personally, that would make me nervous.
Okay.
It all depends on what your tolerance is. But Davis Sterling there's a website out there. Let me see if I can find it. And I can put it in the it's davis-sterling.com.
Okay.
Yes, I have the same question with Brian, but my question is like how the formula that you calculate for the percentage of reserve, like when you say 50%, 25%, like how do you calculate?
Well, you don't. The CPAs do.
It's right you just see that number in the HOA.
It's in the report. It's in the annual budget report.
I see. Okay, thank you.
And it just, if you have, one of the things that, like you need to do is walk around the complex and see if there's a lot of deferred maintenance. Are things not up to date? They look like they've been ignored. The decking, like I said, that's a big issue because that kind of caught everybody off guard. Now, if the newer buildings are steel, and I believe they're not included. I believe that the SB 362 is for wood. But you can look it up. I gave everybody in the chat. I gave you the link to the website. And this website is an awesome resource for information about HOA. So, because this is the man who wrote the law. And they have videos on there explaining, what they're looking for on the decking and things like that. It's an awesome site. I use it all the time. But please protect yourself and your client and do your fiduciary duty. And like, someone says, oh, a lot of them are 25% and 50%. Everybody has their own tolerance. So all you need to do is, just say, I point that out to them, and maybe even send your client to this website, to the Davis Sterling website, so they can do their own research on what is considered to be acceptable. There's also Jackie Berry. She's known as one of the most renowned authorities on HOAs. In fact, she's working on a system to create FICO scores for HOAs. And she, for a fee, she goes obviously for a fee, but she goes in and she goes through the HOA docs and their meeting minutes and comes back and gives you an opinion if this is a solid HOA or not. And I'm sure there's other people who do that. I just don't know them.
Laura?
Yes, ma'am.
Hold on.
Are you in a well?
I'm gonna have to I'm gonna type it into the chat because this isn't gonna work. I'm in the big room at Cupertino.
Oh, okay. Well, you could walk over here if you're here.
Okay, I'm walking over.
Yep, here she comes. Oh.
I'll ask my question in the room.
Can you hear her? Can you hear Yvette?
Hello?
Yes. Yes.
Yes, we can hear her.
Okay, so my question, a couple things. So I've been going off of the premise that it's 35% funded is a good amount because a top agent.
Well, you
Because
saw
he
that
told me
chart.
that. I know, so now this has me a little bit scared because there's so many past ones. When you say your tolerance, whose tolerance? Because shouldn't it be based on whatever?
Well, like I said, that one client,
Uh-huh.
they were looking at a $50,000 assessment before they even bought it.
Okay. So,
and they just
yeah.
went like, I don't care.
And that's fine, right? Because
Yeah.
it's the assessment. I totally get you. That's scary. I mean, I've got to tell you that sitting in this class makes me scared to be a realtor right now. Because
But,
I'm like, holy cow, there's so much more to it than I realized.
Yeah,
yeah.
it was that one that has the chart. Let me see.
And for some reason, we thought that online we read and we looked it up a few years ago. I thought it said a reserve study had to be done every 3 years. But maybe something has changed. We looked it up online a few years ago.
Well, we can look it up again.
Okay.
Yes.
I just want to make sure that I'm following everything that
See,
you're telling me
look
to
at right
follow.
here. 70% is considered to be strong.
I see that. I mean, I definitely see that. I'm just, we've been going off of something totally different. So
Let me Google.
this is scary.
Well,
I'm thinking about my past clients here.
usually nothing really happens unless
Yeah, right. Unless something fails, right?
something fails. Like,
Yeah.
well, like the deck situation.
Yeah.
I mean, who expected that? I mean,
Well, so I sold a condo this year and there was a deck situation meaning that there was a loose, the right side of the deck had a loose, when the property inspector pulled on it, it was definitely loose and it needed to be attached better to the wall. But, he said it's something that should be looked at. And,
I would have somebody go look at it.
well, it's sold and
Oh.
somebody else has it now, so I wanna, if there's something that needs to go back and be done, I'd wanna make sure it gets done because I don't want a lawsuit. if that deck fails.
Oh, you are right. At least once every 3 years.
Okay. Okay.
But they have to do the budget, they have to publish the budget every year.
Okay. Great. So published every year. Okay, got it.
Right,
Okay.
but it's right here, the rule of thumb, reserves are funded at a 70% level, they are considered healthy.
Oh, 70%. Okay, that's really good to know. I will make sure educate my clients that way going forward.
Yeah, did everybody hear that conversation? Okay.
So, yes.
Awesome.
Yes.
Yeah. So any more questions? And I gave you guys the link in the chat for Davis Sterling. They are an awesome resource.
Yeah.
Okay, bye everybody.
Bye, Laura. Thank you so much.
Bye,
Thanks,
everyone.
Laura.
Have a good
Thank
day.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.